The New York Giants make a decision on Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney. We'll tell you what those decisions are and what they mean for the players and for the team going forward. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, P-Train, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for Giants Country over on the Fan Nation Network. And I'd like to welcome on in my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers. If you're new here, welcome. And everybody in between, you are all appreciated and loved. And I thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, the NFL transition/franchise tag deadline has passed. The Giants have made decisions regarding their top two pending unrestricted free agents, Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney. So we're going to talk about each of those decisions, what they were, what it means, how does it impact things going forward. So that's going to be segments 1 and 2 of the program. And then in segment 3, we're going to talk about this report, or actually it wasn't quite a report, but Rich Eisen of the NFL Network coming out on his podcast, The Rich Eisen Show, and saying that the Giants are done with Daniel Jones. So what exactly, what does that mean going forward? And is it true? So we're going to talk about all that on today's program. And again, thank you for tuning in. Let's kick things off by talking about Saquon Barkley. Now, Saquon Barkley was in consideration for the franchise tag. That was never really off the table. However, the Giants, having done a study, and this doesn't get mentioned a whole lot, but I think it needs to be mentioned, and credit to the New York Post because they're the ones who reported it and brought it to light. But the Giants had done earlier this offseason, or maybe it was last year or late last year, a study regarding, the value of running backs after a certain age and when their production starts to decline. And they had found that once a running back hits 27, usually the production starts to go downhill. Now, you throw in the fact that, a running back like Saquon Barkley has had an injury history. He's had injuries which have caused him to miss games in all of maybe 2 seasons of his career. And that was a further cause for concern. So the Giants, when they met with Saquon Barkley's agent last week at the Combine, the two sides probably discussed roughly what neighborhood each side was thinking Barkley might be worth. And as is usually the case with all negotiations, the one side's going to have a lower opinion, the other side's going to have a higher opinion. And I think had the two sides been a little closer in their agreement of what Barkley was worth, maybe that franchise tag would have been applied in order to give the Giants more time to expedite getting a deal done. But this tells me that the two sides were not close on agreeing on what Saquon Barkley is worth per year. So that being said, the franchise tag for running back, according to Over the Cap, just a sneeze under $12 million per year. It's actually about $11.9 million. The Giants, from what I understand, were not looking to go above $10 million for a running back. You think of in terms of what this offense needs. Now, everybody's going to say, obviously, offensive line, which I think they're going to address in free agency. Obviously, people are going to say quarterback. I think that's going to come via the draft and free agency. But here's the thing, folks. Saquon Barkley has pretty much been the Giants' offense in each of the years that he's been here and has been healthy. The Giants, you get the impression, the strong impression, that they want to dip into this very deep wide receiver class. It's a historically deep class. And if they come up with a number one receiver, you would probably think that they're going to want to put the ball in the receiver's hands more so than Barkley as a receiver. So, you need to have a running game, but I think the Giants, and this goes back to last year, the Giants were looking to gravitate towards more of a committee approach where Saquon, they were taking some of the onus off of Saquon, given his durability issues. So I just think that because the Giants are maybe, going to look to get a number one receiver in this draft class, that factored in, as well as the fact that the New York Post had published that the Giants had done a study, an analytical study, which revealed that running backs after a certain age, I think the age was 27, they generally start to decline. And thus, if they decline in their performance, they're really not worth the big money. So Barkley, of course, is going to be 27. So you can assume that with the wear and tear on his tires, with the injury history that he's had, that perhaps the Giants were concerned that the value was just not going to be there and it wasn't worth the investment to tie up, at least $11.9 million on the franchise tag. So Barkley is going to obviously get to test the market. The Giants may or may not get a comp pick if he signs elsewhere. That all depends, obviously, on what free agency activity, how it all plays out. If the Giants sign somebody who cancels out the Barkley transaction, the Barkley contract, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different factors. So we won't know for sure if the Giants are going to get a comp pick if they let Barkley, if Barkley signs with another team. Now, as far as where Barkley could end up, my money is on one of the Texas state teams, either the Cowboys. Yeah, I know. I don't want to see it either, but it's a possibility. Or the Texans. I think the Texans are a better fit. I think they are the more likely team to go after Barkley. And I think if you're Barkley, you got to consider that team because they've got all kinds of crazy money. They've got a more solid team right now, with CJ Stroud and those receivers and the offensive line. And also in the state of Texas, there's no income tax. So Barkley could take home more of his money if he goes to a team that plays in a state where there is no income tax. There's only 9 in the union. And I think Texas and Nevada, where the Raiders are based, are 2 of the 9. So, there's a slight chance that Barkley will be back with the Giants. Barkley has often spoken about wanting to be a Giant for life, wanting to continue his legacy here. In his mind, the contributions that he's made, not just on the field, but off the field as well. Right now, I would say if I had to put a percentage on it, and you know how I hate to put percentages on this, but I think it's probably 40% that Barkley is back here. I do not feel good that he comes back. And if this is indeed a case where he has played his last game as a Giant, look, it wasn't his fault where he was drafted. It wasn't his fault that he got injured. But when he was on the field, and I know some of you are going to say, oh, the Giants had a losing record with Barkley on the field. They had a winning record without him on the field. Folks, Barkley gave his all to this team. I know some of you don't want to acknowledge that, but he really did give his all. He was a good locker room citizen for this team. He was, good in the community, good with the fans. His teammates loved him. He was viewed as a leader, and that will be missed. I know at the end of the day, it's all about, production and winning and all that stuff. I get all that, but the intangibles, I think, is what the Giants organization will miss if Barkley does indeed go to another team. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about Xavier McKinney and the decisions the Giants made for McKinney. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking to bet on the excitement of sports, check out FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. FanDuel also offers a wide variety of bets, and not just on the NBA. You can bet on the NHL, MLB, futures, and so much more. So head on over to fanduel.com/lockedon today and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, P Train. And coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to have Damian Parson of Locked On NFL Draft. He's going to join me to talk about the combine, the draft picks, who raised their stock, who didn't. Damian has been on the show with me before, has done a great job. And a lot of you asked me, would I bring Damian back? So being a woman of the people, as they say, happy to have Damian back. So we'll be talking with him. We will also be talking with National Scout Rick Saratella. He is with All Access Football. That's Friday's recorded show. And then speaking of Friday, we are going to do Locked On Giants Live. Traina, Tana, Dog. You don't want to miss it. 7:30 p.m. Friday on YouTube. We're going to just talk about everything that's gone down. And there's a lot to talk about, between free agency, preview, the draft, the decisions made by the Giants, all that good stuff. So that's going to be on Friday and still to come also, because I'm trying to keep ahead a little bit here with the podcasts. I'm going to have Nick Baumgartner on from The Athletic. He is a national writer who also specializes in the draft, but he's going to be on next week with me on the podcast. So loads of stuff coming your way here on Locked On Giants. Again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. In this segment, Xavier McKinney not tagged. All right. Now, there had been a report, I think it originated with the New York Post, that McKinney might be a candidate for the transition tag, which differs from the franchise tag in that A, the transition tag is less than the franchise tag amount. B, it allows the player to go out and solicit offers. And if the player signs an offer sheet with another team, the originating team has 5 days to match the offer. And if they don't, the player's rights then revert to the new team, and the team that lost the player does not get any compensation as they would if it was a franchise tag involved, where you would get 2 first-round picks if the player signed with another team, and that was the end of it. So that being said, McKinney not assigned a tag. 24 years old, played every defensive snap last year, had a solid second half of the season, and probably that's the one decision that the Giants have made that I think has a lot of people scratching their heads as to why that decision was made. Now, my guess here, and I'm just throwing this out here. All right. Joe Schoen, as we know, has said in the past, draft, develop, retain young talent. And a lot of people, rightfully so, see Xavier McKinney as young talent that was drafted, homegrown talent, developed, even though, he only worked for 2 years with this last coaching staff or this current coaching staff. But whether or not he's going to be retained doesn't look that way. So what happened? This is just my guess. When Joe Schoen sat with McKinney's agent last week at the combine, they were supposed to sit together on Friday. Schoen likely said to the agent, okay, what are you thinking in terms of money? And McKinney's agent, who in the past has represented Landon Collins and got him paid, as well as some other guys, he's a really good agent. So my guess is that McKinney's side had a very high value, if you will, on what they were expecting from a contract. That McKinney was basically shooting for the moon. The Giants, even though they do have about $30 million or so in cap space and can clear out more cap space if they needed to, the Giants have their priorities. All right. Number one, offensive line. That is going to be addressed in free agency. I can tell you that much right now. Whether it's 1 or 2 guys or more, they are going to bring in free agents so that that unit hits the ground running. Edge rusher is another area where they are going to invest in free agency. All right. So you're looking now at two position groups where it's going to be costly. So you're saying to yourself, okay, well, what about safety? What do they do with safety? Because if McKinney walks away, now the Giants don't have a safety. So now what? Good question. They have Dane Belton on the roster, a kid that they like, a kid that has shown himself to be a bit of a ball hawk. They are likely going to draft the safety in next month's draft. Okay. Now, McKinney, obviously, very versatile. He could be plugged in any which way, you need him. But with Kevin Byards being released by the Eagles and a guy that new defensive coordinator Shane Bowen is familiar with, I would not be surprised if they kick the tires on Kevin Byard. All right. So there are other options here. Sometimes a defensive coordinator comes in and he wants his guys. I don't know if, Bowen said, hey, I've got to have McKinney back, or hey, it doesn't matter. I don't know what was said there, but it's not that, first off, there's still a possibility. I don't think it's a high possibility, but there's still about a week to go for these guys to re-sign Saquon and Xavier McKinney. I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't think it's the end of the world either. And, again, you say, oh, McKinney's 24 years old. The Giants could have gotten him on a 4-year deal. He'd be with them till he was 28. Guys, I get that, but not if the guy has high salary expectations, which I've always gotten the impression was the case. Now, if you're one of my everydayers, you know that I have said when the topic has come up that I did not feel good about McKinney returning. Okay, I have good reason to feel that way. I won't tell you why, but I don't just say something to hear myself talk. One of the reasons, though, I will tell you is I had a good idea as to the gulf that might exist between what the Giants think he's worth and what McKinney thinks he's worth. Now, if the market doesn't agree with McKinney as to what he's worth, that's where there's a slight chance that he comes back. I am not convinced, though, that happens. I just am not. I think the Giants basically are going to put an offer on the table, and they're going to say to McKinney, okay, this is our best offer. You either take it or you leave it. And I suspect McKinney's going to just say, you know what? I'm going to leave it. And here's the other thing you need to remember, folks. Yes, there may be some talks going on with Barkley's side and with McKinney's side the rest of this week. I don't know that there are. As far as I know, I don't think there have been, but there could be. Once we get to the legal tampering period next week, all right, the Giants are going to need answers. So they can't put an offer out on the table for McKinney, for example, and say, okay, Xavier, sit it and think about it. Let us know by the start of free agency. No, the Giants are going to want answers quickly, and rightfully so, because think about it. Let's say they put out an offer to the kid on Monday, and McKinney says, okay, you know what? I want to shop it around and see, what I could get on the market if somebody can beat the offer. You think Joe Schoen is going to sit there and hold that amount in reserve while he's trying to rebuild this roster? He's not. It's not happening. All right. Shane's not going to let, Barkley or McKinney or any free agent hold him hostage while he is trying to rebuild a roster that desperately needs to be rebuilt. So that is one of the reasons why I question whether McKinney will be back, why I question Barkley will be back for that matter. Now, again, anything can happen. Free agency, as you guys know, changes at the drop of a dime. And stuff that I'm telling you now could change tomorrow. But in using common sense here, I do not think, when it comes to Xavier McKinney, I do not think he's coming back. I do not think Joe Schoen's going to say to him, go get us your best offer and we'll try and beat it or match it. I think it's going to be just forge ahead with the guys they have on the roster, maybe add to it in free agency in the draft, and go from there. It's not the popular opinion, I get it, but that's how I see the Giants proceeding. All right, coming up next, Daniel Jones. Do the Giants have buyer's remorse when it comes to Daniel Jones? That seems to be what Rich Eisen of the NFL Network thinks. I have some thoughts about that I'm going to share with you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And are the Giants really done with Daniel Jones? That's what NFL Network analyst Rich Eisen reported on his Rich Eisen show, his podcast that was broadcast on, I believe it was broadcast on Monday, I want to say. And Eisen was very, specific with, to give you some context, what he was doing was he was giving his top 5 combine rumors, things he had heard at the combine. And number 3 was the Giants are absolutely done with Daniel Jones, that they have buyer's remorse over having signed Daniel Jones to that 4-year, $160 million contract, even though there's an escape hatch in that contract. So let's talk about that a little bit. All right. Now, are the Giants, done with Daniel Jones? Well, let's put it this way, folks. The Giants can't possibly be, excited about the fact that the injury history continues. I think they are worried that Daniel Jones is one more hit away from potentially having his career end if he suffers another neck injury. I think there is concern about, the knee, while, Jones is making progress in his rehab from a torn ACL and is really, I think a little ahead of schedule. You just won't know until you get him on the field as to how he's actually doing. So that all being said, yes, there is concern about Daniel Jones moving forward. But I want to mention a great tweet that Dan Schneier, CBS Sports, put out. And I got to give him credit because he went in and he did the homework on this. So I'm going to give Dan a shout out here and the credit for this. He did a little deep dive into Daniel Jones's 2023 season, which admittedly was only 6 games, but what Jones did in those 6 games versus what Tyrod Taylor did in the games he played. And what Schneier found out was that Tyrod Taylor had the 9th best ranking in EPA from a clean pocket versus Jones, who had the 42nd ranked EPA. And that Tyrod Taylor also converted fewer pressures to sacks and doubled the explosive pass rate. All right. Now, one thing I have always said about Daniel Jones, and I know some of you have been like, well, he doesn't have an offensive line. He doesn't have receivers. Folks, are you going to sit there and tell me that Tyrod Taylor had a better offensive line than Daniel Jones did last year? Or that, even Tommy DeVito had a better offensive line? Okay, you might say, well, Andrew Thomas was back. All right, I'll give you that. But Andrew Thomas also wasn't 100%. And Andrew Thomas, by Andrew Thomas's standards, didn't have the solid year that he has been known to have when he's been healthier. So one of the things I keep saying, and some of you give me pushback on it, but I'm going to say it again, folks. Daniel Jones's processing time is slow. It is painfully slow. It takes forever to make decisions. He takes forever to decide to, quote unquote, pull the trigger and throw the ball deep down the field. And he's always like seemingly going for the safe underneath stuff. You're not going to win very many games if you play that way. It's just a matter of fact. So Dan Schneier in his tweet basically said, is it possible that Joe Schoen and Brian Dable and the offensive assistants sat down, they looked at the film and they said, this is what our offense could look like if we had a quarterback who was a little bit more decisive and quicker to process post-snap. Now, this doesn't mean that Tyrod Taylor is the answer. Tyrod Taylor comes with his own set of issues. Namely, every time he plays, he gets hurt, or at least he has the 2 years that he's been with the Giants. But it's all the more reason why you think, okay, at some point in day 1 or day 2, the Giants are going to take a quarterback. Now, will they move on from Daniel Jones this year? No, they can't because of the salary cap hit. Will they look to move on from him after this year? Very likely. And I know I was talking with somebody who said, no, they don't need a quarterback. You run it back with Jones. And I said, well, what happens if Jones gets hurt again? And that person was like, well, if Jones gets hurt again, the season's going to go in the tank anyway, and they'll be in a position to draft a quarterback next year. Well, meanwhile, you have now wasted an entire year where you could be getting a young quarterback from a deep class this year, ready to play next year in the event that you do move on from Daniel Jones. So how does that make any sense? It doesn't. So do I believe the Giants are absolutely done with Daniel Jones? Not really, because they are going to run it back with him for the reasons that I've mentioned before, which is, bringing in a young quarterback. If they do indeed bring in a young quarterback, get that kid ready. Don't rush him out there like you did with Jones. Don't put him on the field until he's absolutely ready. It's the same approach they took with Eli Manning back in the day. Jordan Love at the Packers waited. Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs waited. There's no rush if you have a veteran in front of you. Giants probably aren't going to the Super Bowl next year anyway. So it's not like there's a greater sense of urgency. Get the kid ready, then put him into the lineup. All right. If Jones plays well and is able to, stay healthy, then maybe you look to trade him after this year to a quarterback needy team, because supposedly next year's quarterback class in the draft is not going to be very good, at least not compared to this year's. So maybe it becomes a seller's market at that point, to where if the Giants want to unload Daniel Jones's contract, they'll be able to do so. Plus, they'll be able to save a little bit more in terms of the dead money hit that they would take, if they were to move on from him, say, this year. So I do think that there is a degree of, the Giants may be thinking, let's move on from him. I know Joe Schoen has said, look, we still believe in him. We're going to, he's still, the expectation is he's still going to be our starter when he's healthy. What else is he going to say? That, no, we're done with this guy? And I think the true remorse when it comes to Daniel Jones, I think where the Giants really went wrong, this regime I'm talking about, where they went wrong with Daniel Jones, in retrospect, even though I understand why they did it, is that the Giants could have, and maybe in retrospect should have, I know, woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't, but they should have exercised Jones's rookie option year, the 5th-year option in his rookie deal. All right. They didn't at the time, obviously, because of the injury situation, because it was a new regime, and how was Jones going to, fare in the new system? I get all that. That's really, I think, where it started to go off the rails for this regime and Daniel Jones, because by not doing that, Jones goes out, he plays, balls out, gets into a playoff game, wins a playoff game. And now, because you're drafting so low in the order and the quarterback class really wasn't, as deep as it is this year, you're kind of forced to give the guy a contract. So, as I have said many times before, the fact that the Giants put an escape hatch after 2 years into that contract tells you everything you need to know about how this current regime feels about Daniel Jones, despite what they say. And if you're Joe Shane and Brian Dable, I think ultimately it makes sense to go get your own guy, develop him. And because if you're going to go down with the ship, wouldn't you rather go down with the guy that you handpicked versus the guy you inherited? I think that makes more sense. And I think that's what the Giants are going to do. Again, whether it's first round or sometime on day 2. All right, everybody. That's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you watch on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We'll have an all-new episode of Locked On Giants. Again, Damian Parsons coming up, Rick Ciratella's coming up, and then Friday night, Locked On Giants Live, Traina, Tana, and Dog, 7:30 p.m. on the YouTube channel. We'll see you soon, Giant fans.